dirt on there. Well, still, there's some holes there. I'm going to get back to some better cork. Cut a little bevel, and we're going to wrap around and go over the bevel and then trim off any extra. Also, we might need to sand it to fit, and I want to avoid sanding this shoulder down here. Over time, over many years and many corks later, that can get pretty worn with sanding, and then your joint will wobble because the cork's not going to hold it as well as it should be a pretty nice fit in the tenon here. There's just a little bit of play to allow for swelling of the wood, but there should be that should be kept to a minimum, and you don't want to be sanding on the instrument any more than necessary. I've got a rather coarse emery board from a drugstore, and I'm gonna just bevel the leading edge of that cork before I put it on there, and then I can avoid, if I have to sand it more later, I can avoid sanding on that metal band on the end of the tenon there. So I sand that as evenly as I can. And I use a brand of contact cement called Barge that I get from J.L. Smith and Company in Charlotte, North Carolina. They'll sell to anybody. You get a dealer discount if you can prove you're in the Repair Association. NAPBERT, the National Association of Professional Band Instrument Repair Technicians. We're going to put a layer of glue on the wood. Contact cement works by gluing both parts, and then you wait till it's just about dry, and then you stick the parts together, sort of like contact paper that you would use in kitchen cabinets. Rather light, even coat. You don't want to put it on too heavy. But do make sure, I usually go around a couple times just to make sure that I haven't left any dry spots. Then make sure you glue the bevel that you cut. You don't want to forget that. And then turn it over on the back side. And this is why I use a little cutting board, so I don't get glue all over my bench. I've got enough of a length of piece that I can hold on to it, and we're going to let that soak into the cork. It's going to soak in a bit, and it's going to need a second coat after that first coat dries, so we'll be waiting a few minutes. Okay, I've applied the second coat, and it's just ever so slightly tacky. You want it to be almost dry. I started on the back side of the instrument, be it a oboe or a clarinet or whatever, so that when the customer opens the case, they don't see the seam right there. That's not critical though. And I get it right in the groove there. And I just started around a little bit, pressing on it. And I want to make sure the glue's going to hold, so I try to pull it back. And if it peels back rather easily, then I would have to start over, clean it off and start over. Go all the way around. And this piece of cork's really a little longer than we needed. And then I press on it. Sometimes I'll roll it on the edge of my bench, or I can take my steel rule and press on it, make sure it's in there tight. You need a fairly sharp blade to trim the edge. You don't want to tear it at this stage. This blade's still sharp enough. Well, maybe not. So I'm going to start with a new razor blade. And a slicing cut rather than just straight. I'm kind of going diagonally. Tends to work better.
Okay, there.
So I've trimmed it carefully here with a slicing motion diagonally. And now I'm going to see how it fits. I haven't put cork grease or anything on it yet. I don't want it to go on more than about a third or a halfway without the grease. And it looks like I chose my size of cork very well. For cork grease, most of what you buy in the store is just Vaseline at a high price. I use Dr. Slick from doctorsproducts.com. www.doctorsprod.com. And it's mostly a wax, and so it doesn't soak through the cork and make the glue give it up so fast. It doesn't take a whole lot. And I like the cork to be pretty tight at first because it will compress. Slight risk of it tearing or moving out of place at first, but once you get it on there and it compresses a bit, it'll look pretty good. I'll trim off any little extra. There's usually a little glue here and there that needs cleaning off. And then we'll go over to the bench peg, and I'll show you how I would sand that if it were still too thick, and how I'll clean off that glue. I've made this bench peg out of a plastic called Delrin. You can buy these. I just turned one up on a lathe, and I may show something like that in a later video. Drilled a hole to hold it, and that's how I'm going to support the oboe to sand it. And my stomach's going to push up against this end. I'm patting it because of the keys in the way. I'm patting it here. I'm going to lean against it there. If I were to need to sand this, I'd take some of my sanding screen like this and work it like this, being careful to as much as possible avoid sanding on the shoulders and removing any material from the instrument itself. But there's usually a little bit of glue. If you'll take a leather shoestring, you can rub it hard on the shoulder. You might be able to see the glue coming off a little bit. Make it look neat. That glue, if you leave it on there, it doesn't look bad now, and it kind of yellows over time, and if you see your work 6 months later, it'll look kind of bad. So it's good to get that glue rubbed off of there. Like that. And there's always a little bit that I have to trim off yet. And it's a little bit fussy. Of course, this goes faster if you're doing both tenon corks at once, because the time waiting for glue to dry is not any longer if you're doing two rather than one. And there you have it. After it's been together for a short while, it'll compress. I'll usually leave them together for an hour or so, and it'll look a little bit neater than the next time you look at it. That's a tenon cork. While you're at the business of cleaning up and oiling your oboe, this is my Yamaha custom oboe. You can see that some of the gold crayon is all it is. You can buy at great expense a trademark crayon, but I just bought a box of gold crayons at an art supply store. If the gold's off a little bit, and if the grooves are deep enough and neat enough, and the wood's not too grainy, you can refill that easily. Just go over it with your gold crayon. And if you're fixing up a horn a little bit, just polishing it up a bit and trying to get it cosmetically ready to sell, this might make it improve the appearance of it greatly. Let's see how this one turns out. Sometimes they're better than others. And then you just take a rag and wipe off the excess. And you can, with a fine needle spring, get in there and pick it out of the grain of the wood and make it look a little bit neater than that. But that's how that's done. Okay, now I want to talk about how to box and ship an oboe. I often get oboes in, they're maybe sitting at the bottom of the box with no padding down there and a bunch of crumpled newspapers on top. For insurance claim purposes, if there should be a problem, the only things that really count are bubble wrap and the peanuts. and you need a large enough box. You're supposed to have at least 2 inches around, 2 to 3 inches depending on the carrier. And you can check their websites. I get these boxes from a company called Uline. They're double thick, U-L-I-N-E. I'll try to put that information on the video somewhere. And I use the clear packing tape. I'm going to use about 3 strips of it. That didn't go so well. Across the bottom of the box there. And then I'm going to also seal each of the seams. And now I've got it ready for the oboe to be packed up. I've got my large bubble wrap. You could use the small stuff, but I like to do it this way. I buy this stuff from Uline as well, a wide enough strip to really hold the oboe well all the way across. Put a couple layers of that around there. Tape it in place. Tape up each end well. Something like that. Cut this part out if we have to, I forgot. Now I'm going to put some peanuts, which I'm going to transfer from this other box into the bottom of this, and they tend to get all over the floor on you. You don't want too much, you need room for packing on top. Maybe something like that. So now we've got 2, probably 3 inches all around, and room on top for peanuts. And there may be some settling of the contents. I'm going to make sure I really get around the edges with all these peanuts so that the oboe is completely suspended in there on air. Can't shift around even if there's a little bit of settling. And I did that just about right. It's a little bit overstuffed, and that's the way you want it, so it can't really settle. And then I'm going to hold that tight. Put 3 strips across here and seal up the seams, and then that's a box that should be plenty safe. That's going to have to fall out of an airplane or something to be damaged, and that's boxing an oboe for shipment.